I'm pretty excited. I got my 3,000 subscriber award.
Oh my gosh, YouTube sent you that?
Did yours get lost in the mail or something?
My goodness, I'm still waiting for my 21,000 subscriber plaque.
It's a 3D printed plastic, I believe, you get at that point.
Maybe it's like different qualities of wood. I'm admiring that. Like, is that...
Kind of looks like walnut, actually.
Amazing.
Probably worth $5-6.
In this year's construction industry, we're talking, that's some pretty serious coin.
It's interesting that you would say construction industry, Uytae. It's almost like you've been looking into the cost of building housing recently.
Oh, is this a transition?
Segue complete.
Yes, another beautiful artwork. Listen, I'm just getting jealous over here. You see my walls. It's sad.
You can't have this one because it's a permanent prop, but this is a rotating fixture here.
That's up for grabs? Yeah, okay.
Okay, it would be great. Every time we record, you have to put the painting that you don't like back up, and then you're like, ugh. You can't see that I don't have it up.
It's right over there. You can't see it in the camera right now.
It's on that wall.
It's there with the other ones. I just published a video on housing.
Correct me if I'm wrong on this, but I've found that when you delve into housing, you often find that the issues are fairly straightforward and simple.
Everyone agrees. I should preface this by saying anybody that wants to write, produce, create any kind of commentary piece on the housing crisis, you're either going to make a video that's going to be watched by almost nobody, or you're going to make a video that pisses everybody off, and hopefully you land somewhere in the middle.
I think your video and the response it's gotten is crazily positive considering the territory you're treading in. Do you feel like that, reading through the comments, or are you just screening out over shitty ones?
Yeah, the response so far, surprisingly, I think people get it. I think there's for me, there's a bit of a blind spot in the video, which maybe I should start sort of explaining a little bit. What the heck is a purpose-built rental? Why do we need more of these buildings? And can we really rent our way out of the... Well, I guess you read the title already. It's about renting, how a lot of municipal governments are prioritizing rental housing as a solution of sorts to this housing crisis. And, I wanted to do a video about that, sort of exploring, well, why would we want to build more rental housing? The question of do we want housing to be an investment for everyday people, or do we want to treat it just simply as a service?
Because when we first talked about this video, and you were kind of trying to break it down, it seemed like your initial position was, does this work or not?
I mean, maybe my answer is now shifted to it kind of works, but it's not a definitive, yes, absolutely, this will get speculation out of the housing market. And, before I forget, Paige, you were super helpful in just helping me sort out my thoughts on this topic. You, as well as my brother, who's an actual economist and sort of understands some of the more finer dynamics around housing prices and whatnot.
You got a ringer in the family. You've got an economist that you can talk to. That would be so helpful for me.
In a family of Asians, statistically speaking, you're likely to have an economist in there and then a doctor.
Yeah, is your brother well, you see, I was incentivized to move towards this career.
Psychology, no. History, you're disowned. But economics, okay, all right, we can, it's not as good as, dentistry, but
social science still has science in the name, so you got to be close to something that's real, right?
To get back to your point, the reason why municipal governments are prioritizing purpose-built rentals over a condominium, renting over an owned building, is to cool the amount of speculation that's happening in the housing market. Having more people rent means having more people treating their housing as a service and not as an investment. If you build a condo, all the people that are buying up the houses in those buildings are treating this as a way to build their wealth. Whereas if you build a purpose-built rental, your rent is not an investment. You are spending your money, right? It's going out the door. The objective here on a super high level is getting more and more people to rent, reduces the amount of people that are invested in the housing market and wanting it to grow and grow.
What's the difference between a dentist? I always use dentist as the example of kind of like
Sure, dentist.
my generic affluent upper class person. What's the difference between a dentist owning 2 condos or owning $200,000 worth of shares in a REIT?
That really opens up like this kind of tension in this story for me. There is not a whole lot of difference, in my opinion. I mean, like if you think about it, a purpose-built rental is essentially a non-occupied condo for a really, really rich person that has the money to buy a whole building.
Mhm.
I came into this video just thinking, okay, a condo is a building that is sold off to people that own. They construct the building and sell each unit to individual owners. That is a condominium. And a purpose-built rental, if they want to rent, however, they keep that building and rent out each unit to tenants. That is a purpose-built rental. Its purpose, the only reason it exists, is to be rented out. So I didn't even understand that a lot of condominium units are bought out by people that don't live in them. They rent them out and they become part of the rental market.
To me, it's kind of a little bit like, how do you say this nicely? Who cares?
Who cares?
That dentist is either going to go to the Toronto Stock Exchange and buy shares in a REIT, or they're going to buy a condo, which they can get because they've got the leverage. I mean, I guess an advantage of a purpose-built rental is that, in theory, someone who does only have $5,000 to their name can buy shares in a REIT, but they can't get a mortgage.
REITs, or real estate investment trusts, were created by Congress in 1960 to give all Americans the opportunity to benefit from investing in income-producing real estate.
Yeah.
But usually you're probably going to be buying a portfolio across tech companies and things anyway if you're investing smartly.
It does feel like in some ways a bit of a label. The way someone described it to me was that purpose-built rentals lend themselves more towards less speculative investors, whereas condominium units don't. At the end of the day, a purpose-built rental has to work out on paper, right? Like the rents have to cover the cost to build them over a certain period of time. In the condominium market, it gets a little messier, right? Some people buy for sure to rent them out to other tenants and recoup their, investment through rents. But there are other investors in condos who buy with the assumption that the price increase alone will cover their initial.
So this is the issue with a commercial versus private mortgage, right?
Right. The barrier is much, much higher.
So when a REIT purchases a building, it has to work if they want to get financing for it. Whereas that dentist, he could buy a condo that has no rental income and the bank would okay him because that guy has a $250,000 a year income. So they don't even realize they're getting into hot water when they purchase things.
Those little differences, I think many could argue that they add up to, a less speculative investment in the purpose-built rental industry. But for me, it's difficult to sort of really see a huge difference between the two. Like the way I describe it is you can either rent from a landlord who owns a condo unit, or you can rent from a landlord who owns a purpose-built rental building. Like from the perspective of a renter, not a crazy amount changes. People will listen to this and really disagree with me as well. There's also arguments that purpose-built rentals are more professionally managed, that they have much more security long-term.
I've got a few things where I'm like, okay, in this situation, it is the best.
I'm curious to hear them, yeah.
It's excellent around university campuses or for worker housing in specific industry towns. For example, a university wants to create a kind of easy onboarding experience for international students that allows them to offer students a kind of convenient packaged experience for, say, their first year of university on campus, so they don't have to worry about, cleaning the kitchen or whatever.
There's a much more lucrative package, yeah.
There's a lot to learn when you go out into the world. And so purpose-built rental in that situation can shine because it does the value adds that make your life a little easier.
A lot of people might assume that purpose-built rental is also a cheaper form of rental than renting a condo or something like that. But that's another sort of misconception that I kind of personally have to challenge for myself. Purpose-built rentals usually are adding services on top. I'm not going to go as far as saying they are on average more expensive, but there are many, many cases where purpose-built rentals are more expensive than a comparable condo unit that is being rented out. Purpose-built rentals have management, and they have people that are taking out the trash for you and all of these other services, right?
One thing you can get a lot of the time with purpose-built rental, you can literally see a Google review of a building. It was very helpful in certain places I've lived, being able to say like, that building over there has got a bad rating, things, and then you'll see another building and it has a good rating. So it lets you wouldn't get that with a private landlord.
And I kind of appreciate you like being sort of a devil's advocate here too, because I think I don't want to like sort of put out there that like, it's wrong to build purpose-built rental housing. I think it's kind of interesting that municipalities are pushing that option a lot more now. There is a little bit of a disconnect between provincial and federal policy around housing and municipal policy around housing. Provincial and federal being, we want as many people to own their own house, and we're going to help people own their own house. We're going to support them. We're going to give them tax credits, tax cuts. We're going to give them literal grant money. Whereas the municipality's policy is much more, we don't want to give away too much housing. We don't want to build too much. We want to maintain the character of our city. There's some more aesthetic values in there sometimes, partially also because historically, I don't think planners now are like, oh my gosh, like that. The most important thing is to protect the character. I think it's just that municipalities have a history of just placing a cap on housing supply.
Yeah, it's interesting. It kind of reminds me of like, I guess like Joseph Stalin.
Let's bring him into this.
One death is a tragedy, a million is a statistic. For the provincial and federal government, we are statistics. But for the municipality, it is down at the street level. So like slamming in 500 units is going to cast a big shadow over all these existing houses, and people are going to be real pissed about that. This is their biggest investment in their life, and you just made it like shittier. Whereas to the feds, it's just like, there are 37 million Canadians needing houses. We need 20,000 units a year. They don't have the same challenges, and they're not elected for the same reasons. When people are pissed off about the condo going in across the road, they're like, dear city councillor, suck my dick, or lick my clit, it depends on, they've got a clit joke in there.
we appeal to both genders here.
We're a small organization, Miss Spencer. We find that getting along with people is pretty important. Do you think you can do that?
Lick my clit. Federal politicians and the provincial politicians seldom have to deal with the amount of heat about this topic that the municipalities have to deal with, right? Because Justin Trudeau is going to be like, dear weirdo, not my job. Even if they are pulling the levers that would cause that change in that person's neighborhood, right?
They control the flood of housing demand, but like people are sort of getting like mad at like the, I don't know, the okay, I'm not good at analogies. I was thinking like the plug. This analogy was kind of doomed from the beginning. I'm sorry.
I saw a video earlier this week of a dam bursting. I think this would really fit in well. I'm going to put some kinetic text over the top of the like water, and it's going to say like federal government policy, and then like the little township will be labeled municipality. How do you feel about like the benefits to just having a society that has a higher proportion of rental units? Like if you could change Vancouver and it's like 75% renters, is that a better world to live in?
I personally would think so, but there are trade-offs with that. So there's an example I bring up in the video. The country of Germany has about 52% renters, but it's correlated to like a relatively stable housing market. Many economists have suggested that like there's sort of this culture of renting in Germany has been a big reason for why prices were more stable. I think some will point out that like much more recently, Germany has seen housing prices spike up. I personally think that's like due to recent waves of immigration and the housing supply not keeping up.
At least in Berlin's case, I think that may explain the recent uptick.
One other thing is like the political dynamics change once you have a country that has a more majority of people renting. Canada right now, we're approaching about 70% home ownership in the country. So you ask anybody who owns a house if they're disappointed that housing prices are rising.
That is, I think, the core issue in this. Renters don't vote as much as owners. Renters are lower income than owners. And by having a society where you put those people in the minority, they're just going to get blasted from both sides. No one's going to stand up for them. No one's going to like fix the problem. The most disadvantaged members of your society getting the least government support.
But you kind of see like policy shift in areas where there are more renters. Like it's a democracy, right? Like it listens to who's in the majority.
It's kind of good. Like Montreal is obviously weird. I know a lot of people who are on 6-figure incomes here who rent, and it's good to have that group of people that are renters include affluent people. The dentist in Montreal may be advocating for policy that benefits renters. And in doing so, they're helping to elevate the issues that low income people have.
Totally. Yeah.
It reminds me a little bit of the school segregation stuff in the US. Basically, there's lots and lots of things you can do to kind of improve the quality of a school, but nothing improves the quality of a school like dumping rich people into the school. Rich parents are very fussy and invested in the school and critical of things that aren't working for the students. They're like nerds about how the school is run, and they're like on it with regards to advocating for the school and kind of like verifying the school is doing good things. And in the same way, like if you have a society where the rich people own the housing and the poor people rent it from them, it just exaggerates these existing divides. There are certain things where there is no way the government would want this to be how things work. You want your citizens to start businesses. You get any politician and they'll be like, yeah, we want our population to start businesses.
215 children were found buried at the former Kamloops residential school.
That's what we're all about. You're a Canadian and you want to make a widget? Like, you make that widget. That's the sort of country that Canada is. But what the government does with their approval for mortgages is make it so hard to purchase a house if you're an entrepreneur. And it's fucking so frustrating watching my, and they'll be watching this, watching my lame, dorky 9-to-5 friends who are just like, get job, work job for whole life. Watching them skyrocket past me in terms of financial success. I can get like the same income as them, but when I go to the bank and they're like, well, that was contract income. We need someone to say that you get paid $80,000 a year and will do for the next 5 years. Like, because the whole thing and the whole approval process is structured around like steady employment, what the government is saying to people is get a government job that you'll never get fired from and work in it for your entire life. Like that's the safest play for getting on the property ladder, which has got to be the opposite of what anyone in policy-making circles would want their citizens to be thinking, right?
I mean, I totally feel you. Like, if I show up to a bank being like, what's your employer? I'm like, YouTube.
It comes in a nice cardboard box. I like that because you can recycle it.
The employers that I had when I bought a house were not solvent employers. It's not like any employer in the world is just kind of like IBM. That's why I bring up the government employment thing, because of all the employers, like that is the one that they're not going to fold and that you're not going to get fired. It's perverse. At one side of the mouth, the government says like, start businesses, take risks, be entrepreneurial. Policy that's enforced by things like universal healthcare, being able to say in Canada, for example, I'm going to quit my job and I'm going to make YouTube videos. If I have a heart attack or whatever, government's got my back. It's a great entrepreneurial advantage of living here. But then out the other side being like, you can't participate in the wealth creation mechanism that most people in our society use to get ahead. God, I hope your business works out. I hope you make fucking shitloads of money because that's the only way that you're going to get ahead.
I think it's easy to forget that it's not just housing, right? Like ultimately, housing cost impacts the cost of anything that requires land, right? Condos are just so wildly profitable that it will quash any other sort of like, development of like industry. And I think like that's, in broad strokes, like to some extent for me, I feel like there is something about a country that really prioritizes home ownership. It stops prioritizing like land being used for employment and for actual economic growth.
How long is this going to go on for? It's been the story of our lifetimes, right? Like it feels like for you and me, it's just been ever present since like the mid-90s. This kind of like housing, it's getting expensive.
I think a lot of this issue is really acute in cities. especially cities where the geography is constrained. It's like really coastal areas, right? Or
Mountain, America.
yeah, mountains, right.
Vancouver, you're talking about Vancouver now?
AKA Vancouver.
Always making it about fucking Vancouver, Uytae.
But I think, and the reason that it's gotten to the level that it has is actually, I think it's because of the invention we call the condominium. We used to have like a pretty natural limit to like how much housing speculation would happen in a city, because once you built above a couple stories, that had to be a purpose-built rental, right? So like the only way you could really own housing was like, in more like suburban areas, right? To me, like condos, they were invented in like 1966 in BC, in the 60s and other places. I think that we're gonna come to a point like where the future of a condo is kind of up in the air, I think. Did you see that fucking condo that like collapsed in Florida?
Yeah.
I think when shit like that starts to happen and people realize, oh my God, these boxes of investment in the sky that we purchased might not actually be that great of an investment in the long term. I think we're due for some kind of correction. I don't know. That's my thought.
I can't say that I agree, because I mean, there's been kind of high density as an option existed starting in like honestly, like slums are some of the highest density neighborhoods in the world, and they existed in the like 17th century, right? So I assume people lived in crazy cramped conditions in existing city centers a long time ago anyway. So then the thing of being like, well, is this caused by speculation on the ability to purchase a land title skybox? I don't think that's what's caused this. Something changed in the 90s, I think that white flight finished off and millennials decided that they wanted to live in cities. And it caused a spike in demand for a high density product that just has not been met by the construction industry.
I think
can I give you my
please? I really want. I'm curious. Yeah.
Okay, so the thing that I've been thinking about the last few months is, when will that supply be met and what's causing it to not be met? I think that as a society we've done a very poor job of promoting how good the trades are as an occupation for people. People are being sent this message like, go to university and do a degree. It doesn't matter. University education is what's going to get you into the salary bracket. A lot of people are going to university and they're doing like marketing degrees or psychology degrees that are fucking low paid. When they finish university, they'll end up being like an administrative assistant or actually some entry-level job. Highly skilled tradesperson, that is a valid job, and we need to stop looking down on people as a society who make that choice like, oh, that's some sort of failure. That's a rational, good choice. All the economic incentives are pushing people there, but we're doing such a shitty job of like letting kids know you don't have to go to university, because that's actually where the constraint is usually. I mean, at the moment, like construction material costs are very high, but like there's a real shortage of those people and has been for a very long time now,
And that kind of being like the key limit to housing supply right now.
The US right now is struggling because of the Trump era kind of policies. They have had a shortage of low-skilled labor. That's put a strain on the industry, because if you're like, my father is actually in construction, so like I kind of saw this firsthand. You'll often have a builder and they're like assistant. If you don't have the low-skilled labor, then high-skilled labor is doing the low-skilled labor tasks. So the builder that you're paying a lot of money to is like dumping garbage or whatever, carrying stuff around, In Canada, I think we perpetually have this problem because our immigration policy is geared towards high-skilled immigrants.
Right.
We should be looking at the immigration program and visas and being like, yeah, do you know what? It's fine to give this dude from Nigeria a visa to have a job in construction. We almost need to treat construction workers the same way that we treat nurses, prioritizing that to get shit built. We just need more.
I think we need to prioritize them more than nurses to some extent. I mean, I think there are a lot of professions where maybe not nurses. Sorry, that might get me canceled.
Get him alive if you can, but get him!
but like I think like there's a lot of incentives for like people going into law, and I've heard like law is a very saturated industry at this point. Like if you're very lucky to get good work coming out of law school right now. I mean, yeah, this is, I really hadn't thought about this point before, but like you're right. Like if we're kind of looking for like what are some of the blockages in the sort of supply chain of housing, for sure, I think labor is a pretty key one, and I can see just like culturally, but even like, yeah, you're right. Like from an immigration lens too, like we just don't prioritize people getting into that industry. Maybe the solution is those freaking 3D printed houses that people are like making viral videos about. That's what we need. We just need a lot of freaking Wallies just stacking, blocks.
The magic solution that might come down the pipe,
Okay, I mean, what do you feel like zoning bylaws, like things like or government incentives to buy housing? Do you feel like those like don't play a role then? Or
when it comes to like what's being battered around in public, we're often one step behind what actually the issue is.
Okay.
For example, a lot of people in Montreal will still bring up like lot coverage and minimum parking requirements, But those were eliminated in like Ville-Marie in 2018, like the downtown area. I think that like the idea of kind of like increasing lot coverage, bumping up height, that stuff's it's kind of on the right track more, at least in Montreal. And now what we're dealing with is like, how do you make it so that developers and builders can address like the biggest thing on their list of like costs or uncontrolled factors, and being like, you might not have enough people to build this building, just seems like a bigger concern at this point.
Before you even abolish zoning bylaws, let's say, you kind of have to make sure that there is a construction industry that can kind of absorb that extra construction.
I'd love to see those things abolished and simplified and stuff, but I think it's undeniable that there is a issue with the cost of building houses, even in the places that have like very loose regulations. I'll be like, oh, well, there you go, this over-regulation, that's your issue. But I think the truth is that
there are more upstream stuff.
Yeah, I mean, like one of the things, I'm doing a video at the moment where I take an existing medium density apartment and I go through it with an architect and go like, what could you not build today?
The thing that really sticks out when I look at this building, particularly the front, is there's really no barrier-free access to it whatsoever.
I love that.
Just made for you.
For me, like, I'm curious for your take on that. At what point is there a correction? Like, what causes the correction here?
Ben, this is my question back to you. Do you know anyone who's left Vancouver since this crisis started to do remote work in a place with lower housing costs?
Yes.
And are they enjoying it? And do you think that they're going to stay there?
Maybe in the short to midterm, but I think long term.
They'll be back. Ah.
Millennials want that microbrewery.
So those guys, like we all know those people, right? Who were like, my place was really small and I can afford this. And so they did it, and they moved. I'm just watching those pieces of anecdotal evidence to see how their lives work out. If 20, 30, 40 people that we know who are like downtown fucking hipsters bail out and head out to fucking Baltug Island or whatever, a little Indian restaurant might open up there, or a sushi shop that is within range of their house. If this trend continues long enough, I think you do actually have the makings of the solution, which is like you have removed the land from really being a big factor, and now the catchment area for cities is so vast that you are just down to the cost of construction.
I'm very curious to see how this plays out.
We are now definitely talking shop.
Let's do it.
Have you had this experience of like, since the pandemic kind of eased, not socializing with people as much as you thought you would prior to?
Yeah.
I don't know if this is just me, but I've been a little bit like, oh, I thought I was going to be like, this is going to be the fucking greatest summer ever, and I was going to be just super social and hang.
I've heard similar things from other people too, is like productivity actually went quite a bit up for a lot of like colleagues that I know of, and they ended up taking on just like a lot more on their plate. I think that's like definitely part of it. But also, yeah, I think like for me, the pandemic also really highlighted how many of my relationships beforehand were, I don't know, were just about sort of wanting to seem like I'm in some sort of cool group or whatnot. And I think coming out of it, like it's really just, it's all an act. It's all just like, oh, like, hey, you know that person, that's cool. Yeah, like
During a pandemic, I was a lot more like, I'm an urban guy, like urban things. Yeah, the city. Coming out of the pandemic, I mean, I think maybe what needs to happen is a bar opens and I see my friends there and have that like night out. You really cut loose and then you walk home kind of not quite in a straight line and you're like, this is why I live in a city. I couldn't drive a car right now.
That sounds very pleasant to me. I think like I don't know about you, but like for me, I think I'm very like susceptible to just developing quote unquote friendships, you know, just for like, I hate to say it, but like you know, as quasi networking, you know, endeavors. I think when you work as a freelancer, a lot of your friends and relationships kind of enter into this weird gray area where it's like you're personally enjoy their company, but also there is some sort of anticipation of collaboration or work in the future. You would form some doubts of like, you know, whether I'm actually friends with someone because I like them or because we have the potential to work together on something in the future, or that they might employ me in the future. I'm susceptible to that. And I think the pandemic quickly just like allowed me to let go of all of that sort of stuff.
When you're doing remote stuff, it makes it far more like task oriented. There is a lot less of that like incidental interaction stuff that kind of just like, hey man, what's up?
You know, like that the loose change equivalent of time, like the leftover minutes you have after a meeting ends and in between meetings where everyone's just like milling about and you're like, oh yeah, so how the kids gone?
Muffin conversations. And it's like the muffins are out and it's like, oh, I like this muffin, oh, blah, blah. How's the kids? Oh, they're doing good. Da, 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 da. They grow up so fast, don't they? And then like business.
I've like definitely had some great experiences sort of like walking in between two different meetings with like a friend after.
And obviously the model that's being discussed is kind of this like 3 days in, 2 days out sort of a thing where like
Yeah, is that what people are saying?
Once society has accepted that the new reality is that people are going to get sick and die sometimes from a thing, oh yeah, that's what normally happens. Oh, okay. This is what life is.
Well, that's just...
But it's not like an unacceptably high number of grandmas dying because they're all vaccinated. Like, I'm fascinated to know if there's going to be people who live close to the office and go in 5 days a week. Will they get like a higher salary than the remote workers because they're getting to suck dick more? Is there like a networking advantage to face-to-face, and is it quantifiable?
You know, I looked into this for like such a tangent of a CBC series I did. And
is this the video series you did for CBC that was called like, that was on pandemic changes? What was it called?
The non-pandemic. It's called The Non-Essentials. Okay. Anyone else? Fun, snappy intro ideas?
What about Boltug Island?
No. You go. You go first. One of them was on offices. There is a lot of research on like sort of the benefits and disadvantages of offices, but none of them are good. Like none of them are like really statistically relevant samples. And like the one that's propped up and cited the most is this study that was done in China of a call center where a significant amount of the workforce was allowed to work from home, and they reported like something like a 15% productivity increase. And so everyone now was going around citing this study being like, oh yeah, like if you work from home, like your productivity increases by 15%. It was a call center. It's not like offices are completely different across the board. Office cultures are different. Like I'm not even going to say that like, you know, this works for call centers even. Like there are probably some call centers where like it's much more important for, you know, teams to be like closely interfacing with each other.
I actually think I know this study. I think it was Sea China Trip or
Sea Trip. It was a travel agency.
They're like a cheapo air or like kayak in China.
There is a study out there that finds like a correlation between people working at the office finding more opportunities for advancing. There are more paths towards promotions if you are running into your boss after work or during lunch.
Yeah, and like as a person who's like actually managed Chinese staff in China, that work culture is very, very different to Canada. You could be like, hey, Paige, I've got 200 studies on work culture in China. And I'd be like, that's nice. It is not relevant to Canada.
Totally.
It would be like doing a survey on work culture in Saudi Arabia. And then you're like, you're missing an entire gender.
And what is the industry? Like, is it marketing? Is it lawyers? Is like, what is the kind of work that's being done?
I went to the stock market market today. I did a business.
I'm always skeptical of any article or commentator that says like, oh, like working at the office is going to be the better solution or working from home is going to be the better solution, because between industries, between cultures, between individuals themselves, there is a different answer as to what works best for them. It's a negotiation that happens within each workplace based off of what the employees, want.
The change now is that you will be able to apply and work in a job that is tailored to your preference.
I do like that. Yeah. If the pandemic has done anything, it has really sort of hit the reset button on sort of being like, oh, like, of course you need like this beautiful office space with, freaking shared tables and like a slide.
I don't work anywhere that doesn't have a barista.
Yeah, exactly. In the corner. Beer on tap.
If you were working at like some video production house, what would you prefer?
Someone that like just is like managing and organizing all my files.
You want IT?
I think that good coffee. I'll take that.
So you would want an office. You would want a location.
Yes. Yeah. For me personally, like I suck at working by myself. Like right now, like this place that I'm working in right now, I mean, it's my room. It's depressing often. And I'm struggling to find the motivation to like really enjoy my work because I'm just like reading articles and like not actually like going out to places and meeting people.
So prior to the pandemic, did you spend a lot of time kind of lugging your laptop down to coffee shop to just to kind of brighten things up?
So prior to the pandemic, I actually had a co-working space. I rented in the downtown east side.
Did you sit down at the desk and kind of brush the needles away and then...
The desk itself was needleless. It was the commute that was maybe you had to dodge some here and there.
And that was just you being like, for my mental health, it's good to go somewhere to work.
Yeah, just separating the work from your life.
If you could have had a co-working space that was like across the road.
Oh, for the same price? Yes. It was about price. It was price. I got a really good deal on it.
This is a thing, right? Like I bike to work. If I could choose an optimal distance, it would be about 20 minutes bike away. Just because it forces this kind of like exercise. I've wondered often if there's an optimal commute, which is not literally walking from your bed to your desk. It's like, where is that line?
Someone's looked into that. From their study, it was about 16 or 17 minutes. So you're not far off with a 20-minute figure.
That's exactly how far my office was.
It's funny because like, yeah, part of that study was like also surveying people that had really short commutes, like 5-minute commutes. And like they found like, yeah, like shorter commutes, like people aren't as satisfied with that for some reason.
Not too surprising. There's something nice about like, for example, not being able to physically see your office when you're at home. I mean, that I think is somewhat of a sign.
I think WeWork, as bad of a rap that it got before the pandemic, I think it was serving a need for a lot of freelancers that just didn't want their workstation to be next to their bedroom. Like, especially if you have like a studio apartment, having your like your editing desk and everything like that, right, in the same room that you're sleeping and cooking. This is what I'm saying is like, it's actually like, it could be different for a lot of people. Like some people might actually fucking love that.
Like I was basically freelance, self-employed for like 10 years. And now I am again, so majority of my life I've been in that situation. I think it's the same for you. Mm-hmm. I enjoyed so much when I had the job having an office. I didn't take that shit for granted at all. Like the free coffee, the little events, the beer fridge.
Yeah.
All that stuff. I was like, this is great. And the coworkers were like, oh man, I hate the open plan office. And I was always just like, guys, like,
you don't understand.
The company doesn't have to spend this money on you for a thing which you get to have. And it's so nice to punch the card and like go home after work and be like, I work at work and I don't when I'm not, and all this stuff.
Like they don't have to spend that money on you. Like it's a cost for them. You're getting that shit for free. I know like when it feels forced, it's like you have to come into the office. That's when it becomes maybe a different relationship. But like for me, like because I always chose and I like paid, not only did I want to get my money's worth, like I genuinely appreciated that like this is something that like is a service for me,
And I found a lot of modern employers, like at least the company I was employed by, they were okay with me coming in at like 11. I would work on weekends and come in late and stuff. Like I'd always do my 40 hours, but they were, like I had meetings. I would always be there for a meeting, It was basically just kind of like a work mindset space.
That's fantastic.
People's reaction at the start of the pandemic to being able to work from home was so positive. You know, they're like, oh, this is awesome.
Hon, are you ready for some math problems?
Not right this second, Mother. Put them there by the door.
Oh, all right.
Ma'am,
Yes, hon?
could you turn up the heat just a little?
Sure, hon.
Dude, homeschooling rules. Yay!
It reminded me a little bit of like the airline industry's transition to budget airlines,
The travail has been taken out of travel.
where people now bemoan the days, you know, oh man, I cannot believe how awesome, like you look a little bit space that people had, and it was like first class the whole way, and now we're all like,
Thank you for fucking up our flight! Thank you for fucking our flight up!
It's miserable,
yeah, now everyone has to pay for their own office space in their house.
right?
Like, I think that there's going to be a day where a lot of people go like, remember those days where your employer used to pay for you to have a printer and a space to work out of?
I think even the employers themselves don't really want to not have an office, but I think it is like, you know, we've just hit the hard reset button. Like we're just sort of figuring out how the pieces land here. So anyways.
Your footage stylistically is unusual, and you know what you're doing, so it seems intentional. Do you apply a LUT?
I do, but it's a very light one. I think in the past I've gone a bit harder on the LUTs, and I just found like my skin would turn orange and like the sky would turn green. I'd be like, like I can't bother with that. Like let me just put on the lightest possible LUT and then just boost the saturation a little bit. And, you know, I never kind of thought of it as a desaturated look, but I think like, you know, for sure I understand, like I tend to grade more towards like a flat profile. Like it's not, there's not as much contrast. And I've personally liked seeing like the extra detail in the shadows, and like I hate things being blown out. Like I just want there to be like complexity in the picture, but I think it does come at the cost of like, you know, maybe it feeling a little like unpolished.
I remember noticing it a while ago and being like, well, you know what you're doing enough that this is an intentional choice. Like I know that you could make it look less loggy.
I mean,
making stuff super saturated. Like I usually oversaturate my footage.
I want to like look at some of your videos now for reference. Like,
have you ever used these cards?
Nope.
Like a white balancing card? Okay.
You do use those? Oh wow, yeah, okay.
It's fine to stylize stuff. I mean, tons of films are like don't look like the real world.
Like you generally want your whites to look white, unless you're shooting like a film set in Mexico, and then you want everything yellow.
You boys like Mexico? Yeah!
I mean, most other YouTube channels are like saturating stuff. Like it's like a cartoon. So it's actually kind of cool to be less saturated.
I think the key thing is consistency is what I'm hearing from you. Is like have a method to your results a little bit.
Your stuff is consistent. It is consistently desaturated. If I see your footage versus someone else's, I could, without you in shot, I would know that it's very likely yours because of that choice.
I'm looking at some of your YouTube videos right now, actually. The brutalism of Montreal. Do you put like this sort of thought into how you grade your footage?
No, I don't. I just apply kind of like general principles. I use the whole spectrum so that it's as kind of like contrasty as possible without clipping. I put a lot more effort into the aesthetics of my motion graphics. I'm always unhappy with my color grading though. Kind of try not to think about it too much.
I find the more I try to correct the colors in a video that I'm doing, the worse it looks. Like the more like hardcore thinking I put into it, the more I kind of fuck it up from the original.
What was the kind of like first thing that you were like, oh, my old videos suck because I hadn't figured this thing out yet?
Sound is probably the biggest, like I think the biggest jump you can make from like shitty to better in video, you know, in terms of video production. Like switching from the camera's mic to a lavalier mic, the quality difference is just enormous. I think like from a color correction perspective, when I discovered like the flat profile, the cinematic profile on my Canon camera at the time, to me that was a big jump for me. Like I actually recall like really enjoying that.
What was the most recent eureka? Oh man, I should have done this.
Okay, this is one thing that I like. It's like the dumbest trick ever, and I don't know if anyone like would universally agree with it, but I find when you're making any sort of graphics or animations, reducing the frame rate to about 15 frames a second, or like anytime like you make a animation that's 30 frames a second, it's too fluid, and any little mistake you make is just like augmented. People are like, just like it doesn't move right. But you lower that frame rate to 15 a second, and all of a sudden, all these like weird movements that you might have edited in, just kind of like it looks jaggedy normally.
I'm glad you've discovered that one. I mean, that's yeah. I think what's going on there is our eyes have been trained to look at traditional cell animation, which does operate at a low frame rate. I think that may be what's happening, but I know what you're talking about. There's also the I don't know about you, but I when I watch Vox videos, I'm like, rewind that, and what did they do there? Like I'm always dissecting their motion graphics. And one thing they do is they have like kinetic backgrounds that do incredibly slow frame rate animations between things. So it'll be like 1 frame per second. So maybe there's like a document on screen which is like being highlighted by their like highlighter tool, and then the background is like
shifting ever so slightly. Yeah.
I always find, I don't know about you, but whenever I see that and I'm like, oh, that looks good, I'm always like, does it look good in a like way that will date this video immediately? Like, oh yeah, that was the thing back then.
I think you run the risk of dating a video more in the writing than you do in the visual. I think they age much more gracefully than the writing does.
That Iraq today is actively using its considerable intelligence capabilities to hide its illicit activities.
If there were urban planning YouTube channels in the 90s and 2000s, it would have been all about like, we had big bad highways go through all these old neighborhoods, and now like we know we gotta like, protect character, and we gotta, consult with the community. And I'm fully convinced that like now we're getting into a place where it's like, oh, like the public engagement that we really embraced after the highway planning of the 60s and 70s. It's like kind of created its own sort of shitty impacts in like NIMBYism and like incredible like
a certain select group of like engaged citizens who will go along to the meeting and prevent anything from happening.
I feel like that's like the next sort of planning sin that we have to undo in the future, is like this well-intentioned thing like highways were that like really kind of shot ourselves in the foot when it comes to like things like housing and like actual like the evolution of a city and like this whole like okay, sorry, we need to wrap this up, Paige.
So I'm coming to Vancouver in
oh my gosh,
in September. So
we can do one of these in person.
Yeah, I was thinking of having like an event or something like that. Follow on Patreon. I'll post it on there, and we'll meet up for a couple of hours and have a drink, and you can talk to us in person.
That would, yeah.
You will need to give me $1 per video if you want that. So
people, anybody watching this, please pay Paige money. He just had a very arduous contract with the CBC and he needs it. I'm sorry. Should I not say that?
He hates working for state broadcaster. They made me change my dick joke to a pelvis joke, Uytae. How dare they?
Okay, I love that idea, Paige. When you're in town, like let's do it. We'll assemble some sort of crew together, meet up at a pub.
Get to drink that Fat Tug IPA that I like so much.
I'm more of a Four Winds guy myself.
I'll be there for a week. I'd like to do a video about Vancouver. So these videos, we stream them when my computer's working live. So you can kind of watch the warts and all experience if you are on Patreon. And you can type questions into the chat while we do the stream, and then we'll answer them at the end of the stream. So if you want to do something that really helps a lot, jumping on Patreon. I don't charge per month. I only charge when a video is made. So like you're
paying for what you get.
You will actually get like an hour of content if it's a podcast, or whatever, 15 minutes of content if it's a regular video. So yeah, jump on there. And if you are a Patreon person who's from Vancouver, I'd love to know what story to do.
I might pitch some ideas too.
Here's the steam clock.
I want you to shit on that steam clock. That and the totem poles. It's like they're all lies.